is a pretty significant thing. One of the things we did is we talked about we used a model that I've used for, again, 40 years plus. It was designed by French and Raven in 1959 out of the University of Michigan, and they were developing a tool, an instrument, if you will, or a language, almost a language to talk about how you define people who are pretty good leaders and get things done through other people and those that aren't. And those criterion we mentioned earlier, satisfaction levels, efficiency, effectiveness, profits, generation, innovation, all that stuff, how those happen, what leaders tended to make those things happen more than others. And they came up with the idea that leaders tend to operate from a power base. And they had developed this language to kind of define the power bases. And they could kind of decide what combination of these power bases provided the most effective leaders that would get employees to get things done. So let me just touch base with you on that. This is the power bases that they related to everybody and their research. And you can see there's six, not five. There was originally five, and the sixth one came along during the information technology era back in the late 70s, early 80s. People were beginning to take French and Raven's concept and processes and measure how information could be perceived as power, and did a pretty good job of it. So there's really some instruments out there now that are beyond French and Raven's instruments that measure this very effectively, all six power bases. What they said was you have leaders who are, I want to begin with coercive. You have leaders who believe the leader can inflict punishment on the subordinate. Then you have legitimate leaders, and those are leaders by definition of the leader's position. The leader has the right to prescribe behavior change for subordinates. In other words, I am the manager of something or the director of something, therefore, you work for me, therefore, I can tell you what kinds of behaviors I want you to behave by, what things I want you to do to get what we need to get done and done correctly. So that is a very legitimate, and that's a signed role that I have. I'm placed in that position. There's a title, and it's a sign, and it's a legitimate base. Then there are some the expert power based leaders, and that the subordinates believe that the leader is knowledgeable and competent and possesses skills the subordinate does not have. So these are people that leaders look or that followers look up to. These are leaders who know more than they do. They can learn from that leader. The leader can solve their problems. The leader knows more about what they're doing than they do. And sometimes that's not necessarily the case in today's time where people are moving from company to company. They may walk in and that leader may not know as much as. So that can be the negative side of that. Let's jump up to the fifth one. I just start with a five and then we'll work down to the information. Reward power is the belief that the leader can provide rewards for subordinates' change in behavior. In other words, I want you to do something bigger or better than what you're used to doing. Consequently, I can increase your pay, I can give you a bonus, I can incentivize you, I can give you more time off. There's a lot of rewards out there I can use to alter your behavior that you will really enjoy. Consequently, also, to show you how these interact, as a coercive power base, someone who can inflict pain and punishment on a subordinate, and I hold the title that allows me to do that, manager, that's the legitimate. So if you combine coercive and legitimate power with reward power, the way they use rewards is they say, if you don't get this done, I'm going to fire you, or I'm going to reduce your pay, or I'm not going to give you your bonus. I'm not going to give you the time off. I'm going to give you a different job that is not nearly as rewarding and energizing and grow has growth with it. I mean, they have a way to do that. So you can see how these interact. You can turn them into something exceptionally negative, or you could be a leader who has the legitimate title. You are much more knowledgeable than your employees. They really uh, trust you, or they really believe you know what you're talking about, and more than they do, and they can come to you with problems, etc. In addition to that, you have the ability, if they do react the way you want, they can take that and provide you with a positive reward. They can increase your salary, they can give you a larger bonus, they can give you a better job. So you can see how these can work together to either be negative or positive. The fifth and last one that French and Raven looked at was the subordinate's ability to establish positive relationships with the leader. Leaders were approachable, likable, they were compassionate, they had empathy, they cared about the employee, they wanted them to grow. Now, this is the one you can't combine with coercive power. It doesn't work with coercive power, but you can combine it with the legitimate power. That person can be assigned a legitimate role. They can also be perceived as experts in that. And because they're approachable and they communicate well and they're down amongst you and they have empathy for you and they care for you, and they can use that power along with their expertise and legitimate role. Those three right there are perceived as the most powerful, most effective leaders in an organization. So, one undeniable fact: trust is given, it can't be demanded. Trust has to be earned, it can't be commanded. So, you can tell someone, if you're a coercive, power based person, if you don't tell me you trust me, then I don't need you on the team. If you can't trust me, they might say they trust you, but you still don't know whether they trust you. You can't command that using a coercive approach. It just won't work. And that's why people think that power is what builds trust. In reality, it's not. It's actually the opposite. Trust equals power. It is the people who trust you who grant you the power to lead them. And that's pretty much the case in every scenario I ran into. I found no one who was felt a coercive leader was trustworthy in any of the work we did. So what constitute this thing called trust? You know, how does that work? What is that all about? So what trust is about, it's about balance. It's about an even keel between the parties who are engaged in trusting each other. And so, one way to look at that, let me just take an analogy for you. Let's take your temperature, a thermometer. If you're at 98.6 degrees, you're doing great. You're humming. Everything is operating, your organs in your body are doing great, you're doing great, you're thinking right, things tend to be okay. If you go up to 104 because you get the flu or COVID or whatever, your thought processes change. Your body switches to a different mode. It switches to a survival mode and it shuts down certain things, and you're not as effective as you normally would be. And the same is true if you were uh, isolated in a snowstorm and you didn't have anything to keep you warm. Your body temperature would lower to the point where it stops functioning and all your thought process and everything don't work. That's exactly the way trust is. If something is coercive, the temperature's too high and you can't trust somebody. There's just not, things just aren't working right. It doesn't fit. The same is true if you're around a leader who is basically never there, never available, doesn't answer questions, is not seen as an expert, that person is also, you can't trust them. It's just not right. It doesn't feel right. It doesn't feel normal for you to feel comfortable and trusting. In addition to that, you're unbalanced in terms of the leader's ability to harm you or your ability to harm the leader equally as bad. So it's not, you're not balanced. So that's another way to think about it. So the biggest regulator about trust that you're looking at is the ability to do harm. And that is true whether it's at a micro level, in a family situation, a team level, an organizational level, or if you're negotiating for nuclear arms between governments. If one is perceived as able to do more harm than the other, by definition, for whatever reason, the trust is lowered until that ability is balanced. When you have nuclear weapons, if one country has all the nuclear weapons, nobody trusts that country anymore. They just don't know what they're going to do to them. If all countries had the same nuclear weapons, it's kind of easier to balance the trust because they all know that they can all launch equal amount of nuclear weapons. What's kept the balance for nuclear weapons in place for a long time, and why it's so important that those negotiations happen on a regular basis. Now, let me go back. Let's take the teeter. Let me do it on a more basic level. You have a teeter totter. You have two girls. Both of them are on the ground, and they both have their feet on the ground, and they're friends, and they're enjoying the playground. They're having a lot of fun. They like each other. They've been friends for a long time. And one little girl then pushes down and takes the other girl up in the air, and she's excited about it. She likes it. It's fun. And she says, "Okay, now let me down, and then I'll do it for you." And the little girl in blue down there says, "Nah, I don't think I'm going to let you down." She's playing with her, of course. But all of a sudden, the other little girl's attitude towards her changes. Well, wait a minute. I need to get down. She said, "No, I don't want to let you down." The more that happens, the more that imbalance happens, the less that trust between those two girls continues to build. It begins to deteriorate until they get equally on the ground, and that could possibly be regained. But it may never be regained because when they get back on the teeter totter a week from now, that little girl in yellow shirt still might be wondering whether that other girl will keep her up in the air or not. See, so you lose that trust, you can lose it really quickly, and it's extremely hard to get back because you perceive from a coercive standpoint of power. You're perceived as someone who's unbalancing the control, and that's what you have to do. And as a leader, is you want to balance out that ability between the employee and the leader, and each of them to do harm. So that's what happened with the flattening organization. We want to be considered valued, is what they said, and what that really was saying to the leader is, look, you need to understand that if you don't have us, you're not going to be successful. But we understand you pay the paychecks and you put the money in. And we want to respect that without you, we wouldn't have these jobs, and that would make life a lot more difficult for us. So, how do we get this down to the point where we can balance this? So, we got from the comments in one of the chats we did cast a while back. It came primarily as a comment, and but it was an interesting question. How do you apply this stuff when your organization doesn't believe it works that well? The organization's successful, so leadership at the top are hesitant to try anything new. Well, the first thing you really need to understand is what I've been telling you particularly about assessment and the use of assessments, is absolutely critical when you first go into an organization. And for you to be able to transfer what we have learned and explain to you into activities that really deliver some results. And it all begins with that assessment. If you go into an organization, regardless at what level, if I'm going in at an organizational culture change for the whole organization, I'm saying the same thing. I'm saying we need to sit down and find out where your baseline is. Don't you think that makes sense to understand where your baseline is against some standard that we know is along the lines of best practices? And I don't get much resistance to that, you know, because normally you're in there helping them because there's an issue with what's going on. If you're bringing it from a seminar or webinar back into the organization, it's often difficult to go to the top of the organization and say, we need to change this. So instead of doing that at the top level, I might start down at some smaller level initially to begin with, whether that might be even as small as a team or a department in the organization. And what I find is when you find somebody who's willing to, who's having a problem, is willing to take